Good morning. In case you missed it, about a month ago I did an interview with Gordon Clingenschmidt, who does Pray in Jesus' Name, and did a series of interviews. We talked about Farming God's Way, the book that I wrote about the kind of the history of farming. Literally, it talks about how when God created the earth, he gave man his first job, which was being a farmer. I mean, man's first job was being a steward of the land and farming the land and taking care of it. And so we talked about that. But the second book in that series is called Beyond the Plow. Beyond the Plow helps people who are farmers find where their niche markets are and how to go forth and advertise the goods that they raise on their farm so they can make a profit. If you can't make a profit, you're not sustainable. So you have to be sustainable, even if you're doing regenerative farming. If you're not being sustainable, then your farm's going to fail, and ultimately a big corporation or somebody with lots of money is going to come in and buy it from you. And that's not what we want. What we want is for farmers to become profitable and then transition, if they are farming industrial, transition back over to regenerative farming so they can take better care of the earth and go forward according to, once again, farming God's way. So here's that interview, and if you have comments on it or have any questions, feel free to contact me at dgholloway6@gmail.com. So enjoy.
Welcome back. I'm Dr. Chaps, joined now by Glenn Holloway, who is a retired colonel and author of this book, Farming God's Way, Be the Stewards We Should Be. Colonel Holloway, welcome to the program. How are you, sir?
Oh, well, thank you for having me. It's a great opportunity.
So describe your military service, and you did some civilian service after that, but now you're like all into farming.
Yeah, I started off actually back in the 70s as an enlisted Marine during the Vietnam era, and then I went back in the 80s through officer candidate school at Fort Benning and got commissioned as an officer and went through as a cavalry officer, armor, and stationed in Europe and completed that as the executive officer of Allied Command Europe under NATO with Wesley Clark. And then my last civilian job was I took that knowledge and went forward and was working at the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, running the Director's Action Group, and we were in charge of monitoring and developing weapons of mass destruction.
Wow. Okay. So with that great resume, you retired to go into farming? Why the switch?
Well, when I was doing all that, one of my jobs just before that one was I was chief of infrastructure, critical infrastructure for America, and I realized that food was one of our critical infrastructures that through history, if you look at what happened with Russia and the Ukraine, funny how it's kind of happening now again, they actually took control of the food and 18 million people died. So food is a critical infrastructure, and if you want to take over a country or take control of a population, you control the food.
Can you give us a history of food production briefly? In America, it's evolved in 3 different stages.
Yes. Well, it started off, according to the title of the book, they're farming God's way. God created the earth, gave us a template on how we're supposed to grow our food, which was regenerative, word that you're hearing now, which means that every generation should have pretty much the same type of farming that regenerates the earth for the next generation. Well, back in right after World War II, in the 1940s, there was this issue of, well, we need to feed the world. So how do we do that? We've got all these chemicals left over. So you really start seeing the advent of pesticides and herbicides and chemicals being put on the ground, which increased production with the focus of trying to feed more people. Well, they found out that didn't work real well. And so then in the late 70s, we switched into what we can now call in our working centers called industrial agriculture, because you had the Industrial Revolution and all these new machineries and the ability to modify seeds and those types of things to be more productive. And so that then took over agriculture. And it sounds really good, but the problem is that to do that, back in the 70s, an economist, an ag economist by the name of John Eichert out of Missouri said, well, if you're going to work in this production of food, bigger's better, economies of scale. So then we had bigger combines and we had bigger farms, and all of a sudden the small farm went away. And you had communities start to shrivel up because, as you saw and have seen throughout the world, when the local community loses its ability to have farms, the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, and the whole thing that makes it a community, the workers go to the big cities, and farming was done on a corporate scale.
So when corporations began to take over American agriculture, the small farms were sold. They lost their land to the giant farms, like tens of thousands of acres, and giant machinery, and everything's automated. And then they're bringing in the additives, like not just the herbicides to get rid of the weeds. My grandfather did that. But also the genetic modification to go into the seeds to increase crops and production yield.
Correct. Yeah, and over the years, you've seen, about 10 years ago, there was a major lawsuit going on against Monsanto, because Monsanto then patented those genetically engineered, in this case it was corn, and they would literally come through, and this happened in Canada, and test your field and could verify that that was a modified plant using their genetics, and then they would sue the farmer and take the farm away from them.
Oh my gosh. So big pharma, or not big agriculture, and there's probably 3 or 4 companies that control most of the acreage now, right?
Correct. You've got Bayer, Monsanto, which was part of Bayer now. So yeah, they're all, the push right now is for corporations to take over the farms because of that still mental thought that it is more efficient, and then you can determine how they're going to farm and what it is they're going to farm.
And small town America has disappeared because, as you said, because there aren't small farms, there's no community when you go out to these small towns. They don't have the butcher shops. They don't have the baker and the candlestick maker, as you said. And all the men had to move to the cities to get jobs.
Correct. Yeah, that was like when the Industrial Revolution started. They all went to work for Ford and other places where they could put them on the production line. And literally our school system, although we're not going to go down that road today, our school system was aimed at developing people who could work in a factory, not go out on the farm and be an independent worker.
Okay, but you have a solution. The third stage of American farming is this regenerative farming, getting back to the old way things were done and making small time farming profitable again. How do we begin that road?
How to do that? Well, this last week was really a step that most people probably missed, and that was that Secretary of Agriculture Rollins and the HHS Secretary Bobby Kennedy married up the fact that they now recognize and are willing to speak about it, that you are what you eat. If you want to get healthy in America, you've got to have food that's going to make you healthy. So they have allocated $700 million, which is really a drop in the bucket. But the fact that they have acknowledged that they need to change the farming and start doing regenerative farming to regenerate people's health, which will also then regenerate jobs and regenerate the soil, so that we now have soil and plants and things that we eat that will not be degrading our health, but actually making us healthy again.
So soil rotations, crop rotations, maybe sometimes you do corn, but then you do soybeans, because that puts the vitamins back in the soil for the next generation of crops. There's a whole science to this, and it's explained in Farming God's Way, The Stewards We Should Be.
Correct.
By Glenn Holloway. Let's take a short break. What can people learn in this book? How do you get back to regenerative farming, which is stage 3 in the future?
Okay. This book here is, some people might even call it a history of farming book. It starts off with the creation and now goes all the way through to where we're at. It's followed by a book called Beyond the Plow. So if we're going to change, you have to have some way and some hope on how you're going to do that. Beyond the Plow lays out how do you develop markets, how do you move away from this big industrial farming back into small farms. And you literally have to generate small farms throughout America and actually throughout the world that are going to be down at the local community level, so those communities are going to thrive again, which means you're going to have to change some policies too. Right now, you've got 4 packers to control all the packing of meat products and things in America, and then they're bringing in cattle and those types of things out of Argentina and Ecuador. Well, Thomas Massey out of Kentucky had a bill that was called Prime Act. He recognized that to regenerate small farms, you've got to have them have the ability to process and market everything down at the local level. So you've got to have states to be able to take over and have small packing plants and processing plants and all that back down at the communities. And that's where we go from here. We make it profitable through the second book called Beyond the Plow. And then you make it profitable back down at the small community, and then you can regenerate those small farms again and get back to the agrarian life that we had before, which was healthy.
So assuming for a second that Congressman Massey's bill has not yet passed, and then there's going to be like corporate competitive pressure from the big industry, that those 4 or 5 companies that own all the farms, they're not going to want to sell that farmland back to us because they're making billions to keep it. And there's a lot of lobbying pressure in Congress against that. What can we do in the meantime?
In the meantime, through books like this and through webinars and through shows like yours, you educate the consumer. Because who has the vote? And I hate to say it, but you vote with the dollar. You vote with what you buy to eat. And if the consumer comes down, just like years ago when all of a sudden we had the organic move, and everybody's like, oh, well, organic food makes you healthy. Well, that's because everybody was buying organic food. So now if you can buy organic food that's coming off of a regenerative farm, and as we move forward, we have a way to monitor nutrient-dense food to actually see that the food is benefiting your temple, your body, then the consumer votes with his purchases, with his dollar, and corporate will have to respond, which means they'll have to change their farming ways.
Nutrient-dense food, not just organic, that's like last year, right? but next year it's going to be regenerative produced and nutrient-dense food. Where can I find this? Can I get it at my local grocery store?
They are now coming out, and will come out with, of course, this new bill and the money going into it. They'll have labels, and that's how the consumer knows what they're getting. The label says it was, it used to say this is organic. You go into any of your stores and you've got organic milk, you've got organic vegetables, you've got organic. That was a big buzzword. And then following that, it was, raised by animal care units. So it'll go forward. As we go forward, things will be labeled that it came off of a regenerative farm. And ultimately, we should have a product in the future where you could walk in with your phone, point it at a let's say your vegetables, push a button, and it tells you on a scale where you sit on the nutrient level, and then be able to make your purchase being educated on what it is you're eating.
Yeah. There's a lot of our viewers that are in small towns, and maybe their grandparents had a big farm, but now it's been cut in half, and they're holding on. Or somebody who lives in the city is considering their future calling, right? You came out of the military and went back into farming as a calling from God. Why should people go and do the farming and stick it out?
Well, because it's like I said, you're marrying up farming with the care of your health. And you can't separate the two. If you eat bad food, you're going to have bad health.
And your children's health.
And your children's health, because it will affect you genetically.
Yeah.
So, and why people go back into farming? Because then they have, like you said, they have their vote in what they're eating, which is going to dictate their health and also the community's health. So you're giving them an opportunity to literally shape the future and shape the health of America and its people in the future by becoming a farmer. And taking over from these old farmers who have gone through the other ways of using chemicals and things because they thought it was right. I'm not saying they didn't think they were doing the right thing. Now we know, like what happened with the glyphosate. There were suits against glyphosate. They have found out, there's a doctor out there by the name of Dr. Zach Bush, where you can take the breadbasket of America, where they have used glyphosate as one of the herbicides, and overlay it with the cancer map, with the high rate of cancer, and they almost identically match. So to fight that, you've got to get down to the very root, which is farming and restoring the soil, everything from the soil up, so that we can impact our health.
Just an observation. I came from 7 generations of farmers in Western New York. They came in 1832 from Germany. They settled as agrarian, like working the land. Mm-hmm. 6 generations, including my grandfather, they had 150-acre farms. My father was the first one to go to college. He became an engineer. I was the first one to join the military, and now I live in a city. I'm one of those city jobs. But our grandparents' generation, they lived into their 90s because they were close to the dirt.
Right.
They ate from the fruit of their own labor, and the nutrients in the soil gave them longevity and good health. And I told my father, I went back to see him recently, I said, Dad, I got to go to the gym because I live in the city just to stay in shape. How do you do it? You're still thin. He's now 86. He said, my farm is my gym.
Oh, yes.
And he's out there working.
Yeah.
And just like his father before him, who lived to age 92, my father is fit because he's working the land. So I wanted to leave my audience with that thought. Your last thought, and then I want to say a prayer.
Well, the last thought is that I think I'll hit the last period on the consumer. Literally, we have to get the call for action is to educate them on where we are now in the industrial agricultural revolution, how we're going to stop it, and then give the farmers a way to move forward, because nobody's going to give up a job and walk away from it if they can't make a living. The quality of life is still there, and that's where the new young generations are going to come in and take over those farms, because they're looking for a quality of life. It's not about the money, it's about quality of life and regaining and rebuilding that family structure and the community that results from it.